So the idea that you can print money and create the illusion that everything is fine is criminal. Not even delusional, it's just straight up criminal, because you're transferring the money, the wealth, from mom and pop by putting them into bankruptcy to put into your pocket. If we as individuals don't get involved and fix this, as in demand immediate change, the market will do it for us. But when the market moves, the snowball will be so large, it will crater. You're going to wake up one morning, you're going to see silver and gold rocketing. You're going to see all sorts of problems because it's pure chaos and you won't be able to.
Are we already in recession, or is this recession coming in 2025? Those are some of the questions that we're going to try to help answer today. And the way we're going to do that is by starting with the consumer health. And I'm going to show you guys data from the government that says 155 million people, Americans, are struggling with their bills. And according to the government, 35 million people have lost their job. And after we go into the consumer section, which is really important to the economy, then we're going to go into the government and we're going to check in on how they're spending money, the assets that they hold, the government debt, and all of those things, ending with 14 major factors that spell trouble for the 2025 economy. And don't forget, you guys, everything will be chaptered in this description. Happy Friday. Mitch Vexler, it's nice to be with you, sir. How are you today?
Good. It's as usual been a very interesting couple of days putting some documents together, but we'll get into that here in a few minutes.
You know, I'll say, Mitch, I'm excited to talk and report on your Zero Hedge article. When do you think that's coming out?
They sent an email. They said it was supposed to be out yesterday. So far, it hasn't come out, but I've already got article number 2 already penned up, and Leslie's in the process of cleaning that up right now to get the charts to be more presentable. Versus the spreadsheet chart. So she's working on it, but we're ready.
Well, I'm proud of you, man. And if you guys know who Zero Hedge is, if you guys know who that reporting bureau or company is, take a look today, go active today. And if you see an article comes up that says, why is property tax illegal, or something about property taxes, that's Mitch Vexler's article. So really proud of you. But either way, you guys, don't forget to like the video, share this video, and enjoy. And we're going to start by talking about the health of the consumer, which is very, very important to the economy in the United States. 70% approximately of GDP, which is a measure of the growth of our economy, is from consumers and their spending habits. So I'm going to show you guys some data from the United States Census Bureau. So this is government data, which is a crazy thing. And this is called, again, the 4.2 cycle 09 household pulse survey. So don't forget, you guys, if you want additional data to review and not just Fred economic data, go to these pulse surveys. These have very revealing information. This pulse survey is regarding employment. Now, the question is have you experienced loss of an employment income in the last 4 weeks? Okay. So what I want you guys to understand, this is so hard for me to comprehend, Mitch, because it means that when we're looking at the U3 and the U6 unemployment from the Fred economic data, that it is straight up lying to us. This is saying in the last 4 weeks, all right, everyone sit down, 35 million people lost their job. That's just in the last 4 weeks. I don't know if that's accurate. To me, it seems, how could 35 million people, Mitch, lose their job in the last 4 weeks? But nevertheless, you guys, when we divide 35 million into the 256 million that the survey is surveying, that's a 13.7% unemployment rate. Meanwhile, when we go to the unemployment rate that the government is using, it's only saying 4.2. So one data set says 4.2, the other data set says over 13%. When we go to mortgage payments, the amount of Americans that are behind on their mortgage, there's approximately right now 6.6 million people behind on their mortgage. Now, there's 53 million homes that have their home paid off free and clear, just not of property taxes, homeowners insurance, and HOA, as people are starting to find out. But nevertheless, 6.6 million people behind. When we divide that into the number of people with mortgages, that is a delinquency rate right now of 6.3%. Again, 6.6 million people behind on their mortgage at a 6.3% delinquency rate. But when we go over to what the federal government is using to sell you and the press is using to sell you, it's saying that the delinquency rate on single-family residential mortgages is only 1.73%. Something is very, very wrong here. When we go into this pulse survey that's asking the question, difficulty paying for usual household expenses, and this is saying in the last 7 days, you guys, 155.8 million Americans are suffering right now to pay their bills. Now, it's either a little difficult, somewhat difficult, or very difficult. But when we add all those together, that's 155.8 million, or that represents a total of 60.7% of people are struggling to pay their bills. And when 155.8 million people are struggling to pay their bills, that doesn't seem like it's good for the economy. When we look at the pulse survey for rent, households currently caught up on rent payments, 9.4 million people said no. 9.4 million people currently are behind on their rent. When we add the rent to the mortgage, that's over 15 million people behind on their shelter expense. That's not good. And when we keep digging here, here's the delinquency rate on credit cards. This is the 10-year outlook. Again, this is Fed economic data. We already know that we got to kind of hold what they're saying with the grain of salt, because it's, again, it's not accurate. How could the government have different data saying something completely different than what the government is saying over here? It just doesn't make sense. But right now, what I wanted to point out is the delinquency rate is 3.23%. That doesn't really spell out the depth of this problem, but I want you guys to pay attention once again to the trajectory. Obviously, this is the highest delinquency rate we've had over 10 years by far, but the delinquency rate is going up. Now, it plateaued right here going into Q3 of 2024. That's interesting. But you guys, this is behind by an entire quarter. When we look at more recent reports on delinquencies, it's going up. Don't forget about this thing right here, student loans. Remember, you guys, there's $1.7 trillion in school loans, and those payments just started at the end of September. So going into 2025, there's a lot more Americans that are going to be paying back that $1.7 trillion. The biggest thing of all, when we're talking about whether or not we're going into recession or we're in recession, is looking at the real household income. We already know the inflation is out of control, that prices are out of control, which would normally be okay, right? 100 years ago, prices were lower. But the biggest problem here, the elephant in the room, income didn't go up with the inflation. Income went down as prices went up. So our entire lives were flipped upside down, you guys. And most of us, including me, and I'm in my 40s, that's crazy to say, we've never gone through an inflation battle like we're currently facing, not in our adult life anyways. And I wanted to point out that in 2019, and this is real income, this is adjusted for inflation, this is not nominal. In 2019, real median household income was $81,210. So after all the inflation, prices going up, income went down, guys. According to 2023, it's only $80,610. That's a really, really important deal when it comes to consumers paying for this mess. The last thing I wanted to show you guys here is just how bad house prices went up. All prices went up of all assets. We have an everything bubble, but I wanted you guys to pay attention to the housing market bubble. The red line is actually Case-Shiller. And I want you guys to see this run up right here where my mouse is. This is the 2008 global financial crisis run up, followed by the deflation or decline in home prices. Look at the massive bubble we have now. We already had a massive bubble going into 2019, but after lockdowns and after COVID, we have a triple bubble now. A triple bubble. It was starting to go down right here. The bubble was starting to collapse. But what happened, you guys, in 2023? Beyond just the inflation, the bank term funding program happened, and it saved a bunch of banks. And that's not good for us as consumers. Prices are absolutely ungrounded from income. Mitch, here's the thing. We're looking at government agencies reporting data to us as consumers. We're trying to figure out what's happening. Should we pull back and not take risks? Should we just keep spending our money, keep investing in the stock market because prices only go up? We're trying to figure this out. So when we go to the government agencies and they have two very, very different data sets, what does that tell us about mainstream? In other words, Mitch, why do you think that mainstream media, pretty much everyone in mainstream, is not using the pulse survey data? Why aren't they using it?
Honestly, because they're stupid. The reality of this situation is that mom and pop are being lied to. Mom and pop, their equity is being stripped. And the proof of that actually comes not only in the 12 elements you just read, but through the CPI itself. And the CPI is a giant lie. The CPI equals the CP lie. They are cooking the books. That is the story. The government is cooking the books. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, which created the CPI that's used by all these divisions, failed in one thing that we have said, and we said it 3 months ago. And that is nothing else matters but the median household income. If the median household income cannot carry the debt load, the expenses that are part of an average household, there is a huge problem. Well, you just read 12 elements, and I marked them all down here. So one of the comments you made was, how do they get the 35 million people? Well, we said that those 35 million people, they're now, adds up to about 13%. We said 3 months ago, it was well over 10%, yet the government's numbers were 4.2%. Again, this is cooking the books. You can simply say, just by what we did, is look at the amount of people coming over the border. They don't have jobs. Add that to the list. Poof, you're well over 10%. Well, mainstream media is picking up on narratives for whatever reason, but the truth of the matter is it's stupid, right? They're not there for their viewers, and that is part of the problem. One of the reasons why, and I don't agree with everything that's in zero hedge, obviously, but the bottom line is they've got people that are thinking and writing stories based on what they're thinking versus here's a narrative that's designed to delude mom and pop. And now you're starting to see what we've been pounding the table on float to the surface with regard to all these elements. They're all tied at the hip. Nothing else matters but the median household income. And that is what you're starting to see in these numbers.
And ultimately, to the viewers, we're going to ask the question at the very end, and I'll ask Mitch whether or not we're in recession or whether or not he believes we're going to be in recession in 2025. Don't tell the viewers yet, Mitch. But, you know, as far as what you are saying about cooking the books, I want to remind the viewers, like, we don't have to guess. What Mitch is saying is not speculation. Here's the data right here. You guys literally just read it yourself. You can go here. This is going to be linked in the description. We know they're cooking the books because the data is so ridiculously different, and they're only looking at the data that is fraud, that says that everyone's okay. Well, I'm not okay, and I've been trying for the last 3 years to be okay. Now, Mitch, do you think that another reason they're not using that is because they can't afford to be honest? In other words, the fraud is the only thing keeping the economy together?
Well, the fraud is the fraud, and that is what is creating the illusion that the economy is fine. But you went through 12 points in there, and every single one of those points is literally why I'm not building. I'm a developer and a builder, and I'm a monkey in the middle. I am only as good as my tenants can afford to pay rent. And as I said, I'm not building because of all the math and everything that we're running. What I'm seeing lends to clarity, not for the attitude of building, but for the attitude of not building. When you go through all these numbers and you look at this and you realize my tenants, my residents, my commercial tenants, how in the hell can they pay the rent based on these inflated prices that we know aren't real? And you even had a chart in there showing the pricing of housing as it has gone up. Well, the values, according to the central appraisal districts across the United States, are up 100% in the last 5 years. We know that they have created, by fraud, $21.2 trillion roughly of inflated housing value. Yet, even if you said, okay, fine, the average inflation is 3% per year times 5, that's 15%. How in the world do you justify an 85% swing but for fraud? And that chart ties right to one of the charts that you just showed. So the point of the matter is the fraud is the fraud for reasons of transferring wealth from mom and pop, which is what's happening here, into the hands of criminals. There's no law to back them up. There is no real estate tax law to back them up. They just did it. And the mainstream media, being stupid, has followed the exact same path. Well, this is what we're being told. Well, okay, fine. If you were told to go jump off the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, would you be stupid enough to do it? And
we know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Some people would jump off that bridge. So, I mean, closing up the consumer part of the video, it's fair to say that as a result of bad guys or apathy or data manipulation with these creative algorithms cooking the book, that consumers are going to be blindsided, just like they were blindsided in 2008. I was one of the people that were blindsided. And regarding consumers, when we look under the hood and we look at the math and we look at these poll surveys, things are not going well at all for consumers right now. Consumers are absolutely suffering. So as far as the consumer portion of this video, I hope we showed you guys, hey, the blindsided manipulation is there. And number two, people are struggling when we look under the hood and we look at these data sets. Now, let's move on to the government and see how they're doing. Mitch, we're first going to start with the federal deficit for 2024 coming in at 1.83 trillion. This is the third biggest year in history of deficit spending. Again, 1.83 trillion, you guys. So when I look at this, Mitch, usually there's a deficit to get us out of a recession. So when I look at this, to me, it's very clear that the Federal Reserve and the government is at the very least spending incredibly recklessly. And they're spending as if they're trying to keep us out of a depression. Again, you guys, 1.83 trillion, the third biggest deficit year in history. And they tell us last year we weren't in recession. Now, I know a lot of people think that we went into recession in October, but the fact of the matter is, according to the government, we have not got into recession, but according to this deficit, they're keeping us out of a depression. You guys, during the global financial crisis in 2009, the government deficit spending was 1.42 trillion. So we exceeded that last year. Now in 2008, the start of the global financial crisis, the deficit 0.45 trillion, so 450 billion. That's it. So that's when the recession started. The last recession, not counting the lockdowns, the last recession we had in 2008, the government deficit was 450 billion. You fast forward to today, it's 1.83 trillion. And you guys don't think that we have problems with our economy? You guys see my point here? But look at this. We're starting the 2025 fiscal year at a deficit of 624 billion. We are ahead of last year's schedule, the third highest deficit spending year in history, by 64%. How the heck is that possible? This is absolutely ludicrous. Now, once again, when we go into the 10 and the 2 year, this is a measure of an incoming recession. We've been uninverted since about August. This is one of the longest periods in history that the 10-year and the 2 year were inverted. Generally, and it's hard to know this because so much data is manipulated, but generally it's 6 to 8 months before entering recession. So you guys can come back here and you kind of look at this chart, you can max it out and you can see that. So it goes inverted, uninverted, and then recession, inverted, uninverted, recession, inverted, uninverted, recession. So if the same pattern happens here that's been happening the last 50 to 100 years, we got 6 to 8 months from August before entering recession, which would mean first quarter of 2025. Here's the other problem, Mitch, and this is going to be a huge problem for a lot of people at the same time that consumers are struggling and the economy is struggling and that we're entering recession. Inflation still may go up. And we can see that with the 5-year break-even inflation rate. The market's expectation for 5 years from now is inflation is going to be over the 2% goal to 2.4%. So imagine a scenario that there's overwhelming job loss at the same time that there's devaluation of the dollar. That's a double whammy, you guys. That's not good going into 2025. Now, on top of that, the government still has plenty of money to issue inflation and to keep bankers and elites, quote unquote elites, propped up. The Treasury General account still has $719 billion. I have an idea. Give some of that money to FEMA and go help those victims out in Tennessee and North Carolina because that money's just sitting there, $719 billion. On top of that, the mortgage-backed securities by the Federal Reserve is at $2.2 trillion. Sell some of that. Go help those people out. Go help those Americans out that are suffering. We have such a great economy, right? Then why are so many people suffering in Tennessee, Western North Carolina, places of South Carolina, Virginia? I mean, this is unexcusable, but they have been doing quantitative tightening as far as mortgage-backed securities, but they still own an overwhelming amount, you guys. Now, in addition to that, another thing that's unhealthy about the economy is how much the labor market is being manipulated by the government. We are not supposed to have the government create new jobs. The private sector in healthy economies is the primary employer, but that's not what we're seeing here. And I wanted to show you guys, ever since about 2019, since about 2020, actually, the start of 2020, government jobs have been skyrocketing. And what that does, again, is it masks what's really going on in the most important sector, which is the private sector of the economy. You guys, the government's just manipulating the numbers. I wanted to show this to you guys. This is one thing that I'll be following, Mitch, which is the construction jobs. So far, we haven't had a really big decline in construction jobs, but when we see this decline, usually that means we're already in recession. So if you guys want to know whether or not we're already in recession, one of the things that I like to look at is the construction. And right now, according to these numbers, and again, this, I don't know if this is illegal immigration, Mitch. I don't know if this is how manipulated this is, but according to this data set, we're not quite in recession. Before we go into the 14 things, this is the GDP. So, you know, again, October of 2023, some people thought we're in recession. You guys, you know, GDP was over 3%. So, you know, Q3 of 2024 came out 3.1%. So I did want to acknowledge that the data that we're getting from the government says we're not in recession. Mitch, my question for you is this, and I thought in 2023 that home prices were going to continue to decline. Home prices declined from June 2022 to about February of 2023, and they were declining fast. But something called, again, and I like to point this out all the time, the Bank Term Funding Program was made over the weekend, and an injection of hundreds of billions of dollars was injected back into the banking system, which to me means we're living in a socialist country. So my question to you is the U.S. really a socialist country, and are they just lying to us about that, Mitch?
Well, as I said, I'm here in the United States as of 1990 because I left a socialist country called Canada. My taxes when I left were 75% net effective. So what we're starting to see play out, courtesy of the last administration, is basically trying to turn the United States into Canada. And these problems, I want to go back for a second because you said the deficit is there to get us out of a recession. I want to flip the switch and give everybody the opportunity to think a little bit differently. The deficit is there because we're already in a recession. It's not to get us out. It's to cover up the crimes that have been committed by creating the recession. It is to cover up the crimes being committed by overinflating the real estate taxes to cover up the fact that we are in a recession. So a recession is designed, or it's initially per the CPI, is two economic quarters back to back of less production, gross domestic product. Well, we've hit that multiple times over. But because the government has been cooking the books, and we actually have a story, I think Travis posted it, on the CPI, and it's the history on the CPI going back years. And every year, every 18 months, they go and they rearrange the definition of what the CPI is and take elements out. Well, that means that certain things are being costed that aren't built into the CPI. And yes, that all backs up on what is designed to be the deficit. So they're spending over here to cover up the fraud that's being produced over here. They're increasing the real estate values by 21.25 trillion over the last 5 years to cover up the fact that they're spending money over here. And that's basically what this is. This is a shell game to cover up theft of mom and pop's money. So the deficit is an illusion. There's real deficit. There's absolutely no doubt. They've spent the money, but they're getting more money coming in to help cover that up because they have increased. It's the opposite of an amortization schedule. By not paying off the debts, they're increasing the debt load on mom and pop to the point of roughly $1.38 million per house in the United States, comprised of 1.1 million plus 243,000 at the local taxing level. 1.1 federal unfunded US debt plus the national debt Okay, that's 1.1, and roughly 240, 250,000 at the local real estate tax level. That money cannot be paid back. There's no math on this planet to justify that. And that all shows up in this deficit. So it's the deficit plus these numbers. The point of the matter is they create the deficit to cover up the crimes that they have committed, which would fall under RICO. Why? Real simple. Pay me my taxes or I'm going to take your house. That's their mantra. That's at the local level. You got the same problem on the federal level, Federal Reserve. That's why we said, I wrote 53 reasons why the Federal Reserve should be closed. These are your two entities that are taking money that they're not entitled to. Nobody's saying not to pay the tax. Taxes are fine to avoid chaos in society. The problem here is that so much of your taxes are going into the fraud to rescue these entities. These entities have no reason to exist.
Well, isn't that socialism?
Welcome to Canada, eh?
Sounds like socialism to me, Mitch. The math doesn't work. The fraud is rampant. They stop caring about the people, and it shows in the math, and they're lying to us. That sounds like a socialism.
Except the reason we're pounding the table is because we understand the math. And as I've been saying, as a society, this is all hands on deck, because if we as individuals don't get involved and fix this, as in demand immediate change, the market will do it for us. But when the market moves, the snowball will be so large, it will crater. You're going to wake up one morning, you're going to see silver and gold rocketing. You're going to see all sorts of problems because it's pure chaos and you won't be able to slow it down. They're going to put market breakers in. So, the market itself will shut down when things get really rocky. But that's what's going to happen versus, okay, let's agree to disagree. You guys basically screwed this up beyond repair. How about we get a situation where it's called a workout? So people get 30, 40 cents on the dollar on their pensions. At least they're getting something as compared to nothing. And nothing right now is on the table because every time they step up and say, well, we're going to increase the deficit to, we got to avoid a recession. No, you're avoiding a Great Depression, a greater depression. And it isn't going to work. There's no money to pay this off.
I don't have any money to pay $1.3 million in deficit spending. That's crazy. So here's a Zero Hedge article. This came out January 2nd, titled, What is the Biggest Risk for 2025? And 13 other highlights from DB's 2025 market survey. And I'm going to read through this very quickly. This will be linked so you guys can come back to the video description, hit more, and you can go to this link. Now, the first thing, this is crazy. Only 2% of people that were surveyed believe U.S. growth will be below 1% in 2025. Isn't that crazy, Mitch? So literally almost no one thinks that we're going into recession in 2025 because we would need 2 quarters of negative GDP. That's crazy in itself. Now, here's what's interesting. Okay, so a global trade war is seen as the biggest observable risk for 2025, followed by tech stock plunge and concerns over inflation and bond yields. That sounds pretty good, but nothing about median household income. Number 3, investors think Trump means business on tariffs, but an average score of 5 means that they don't think he'll be as aggressive as the campaign pledges. Number 4, the overwhelming majority, 90%, believe that German debt brake will be reformed. So we got some world problems here. German respondents were much more confident that there will be a reform of some description. Number 6, DB asked the question 3 times in both 2021 and 2024. Less think there's a U.S. tech bubble in 2024 than in 2021. Interesting, because the bubble just got bigger, didn't it? But the overall number is still high. Interesting. Number 7, for the Mag 7 in 2025, while 33% believe they'll decline and 22% think by more than 10%, 67% think they'll be higher with an average overall gain of 6.8% expected. YE 2025 Treasury yield expectations are a bit lower than current levels, with only 4% believing we'll end 2025 greater than 5%. Germany yields are seen steady in 2025 on average, but with 50% expecting, that's a lot. 10-year yields to end the year less than 2%. Interesting. The S&P is expected to be 5.2% higher in 2025, with 23% believing it will be lower and 23% believing it will be greater than 10%. Number 11, Bitcoin and Nevada are seen as more likely to have to half than double, especially Bitcoin. That's interesting, to half instead of double. That's not good news. AI is increasingly infiltrating the office, but extensive use hasn't increased in the last 5 months. They're thinking possibly AI is going to damage the economy. That's interesting. The US and Europe are clearly diverging in expected inflation, with US picking up again through 2024, but European expectations sharply lower since the summer and below 2% for the first time since Q4 of 2021. I wonder if that's because the US can print money and print inflation for the world. Probably. 14, Home Alone is your favorite Xmas movie, followed by Die Hard. That's interesting. What about the Christmas Story? Is that in here? Where's the Christmas? Right here. So the Christmas Story is way down here. That's interesting. Mitch, can you explain to the viewers why not? But when will the recession start?
We've been in a recession for well over 3 years. So let's hold the following single statement to be true: that mom and pop are the economic engine of the United States. So how does one square that 35 million households are unable to pay their overhead? And as I said before, it's not how much you make, but how much you keep. So let's say that 30%, for the sake of conversation, of the population is dancing on bankruptcy's doorstep. And that number has been pretty much the case. It's going up. Understand that it's not about how much money you make, but how much money you keep. The amount of population, let's call it, for the sake of conversation, 30% that's dancing on bankruptcy's doorstep. Well, that number has been out there for quite some time, at least since I've been working on these videos with Travis. And when you go backwards and you realize that you've got 5 years of fraud built into the real estate tax system for the 21.25 trillion, and that is a major contributor to the condition of mom and pop and the bankruptcy of these 30% of the population, give or take, where they're going to lose the roof over their head or they're going to go bankrupt, your choice. So the reality is, given these circumstances, and given that mom and pop are the economic engine, you must realize that if there's no economic engine, or 30% of the engine is broken, then by definition, that would be a recession. So the idea that you can print money and create the illusion that everything is fine is criminal. Not even delusional, it's just straight up criminal, because you're transferring the money, the wealth, from mom and pop by putting them into bankruptcy to put into your pocket. And therein lies the problem. The mainstream media is repeating a story that is fiction. It simply isn't true, and they're doing it on the backs of their readers. And that is what makes them culpable.
Okay, so just to reiterate, your answer is basically we've been in recession for the last 3 years. You've explained why. You know, my answer to the question is it just depends how you look at things. If you look at things like how I was raised, like don't spend what you don't have, care about your community, be honest and forthcoming, I believe, in looking again at how the government is spending money, I think we've been in recession. If we were to look at that, how they're spending money recklessly, I think we've been in recession since 2012. Quite honestly, when they started Operation Twist, or else why would they have done that in 2012? Go back and look at mortgage-backed securities in 2012. If you guys don't believe me. But if we're to use this crocked, lying, manipulated data, and that's just the time we're in right now, you know, I think it's possible that the first signs of negative GDP before they revise info. So it's possible a new administration comes in, all the data is revised. But if the data is not revised, I think that they're backing themselves into a corner with dishonest information. That dishonest information is going to catch up to them probably Q1 of 2025. So that would be my guess. But to Mitch's point, if I have the same outlook and explanation as Mitch did, I think it's 2012, guys. I think it's 2012, and no one can change my mind on that because, again, the deficit spending. They don't have the money. We're paying for those expenses. My children are paying for my grandparents' expenses. I mean, this whole thing is really crazy. So other than that, guys, a little bit of housekeeping, and I'm going to give you the last words, Mitch, but check out everything in the description. We have links. Step 1 is sign the petition that's in the description. Step 2 is take some free courses that we made for you guys on how to fight property tax and how to purchase a home using your credit, income, and assets. Plus, there's a whole bunch of other stuff there. I got one more video coming out. I told you guys that about the soil and water test in Irwin, Tennessee. It is a banger. You guys are going to really... I think that's going to blow your mind on what they're doing to people and the lack of care. So other than that, guys, happy Friday. Mitch, can you give our viewers the last word, sir?
Sure. I think the way that Travis started this video with these 12 bullet points ties to everything we've said in this video. And the government left hand doesn't know what the government right hand is doing. They're completely clueless. They're completely disconnected. Now, is that intentional? To be determined. But the net result is that by their own admission now, one hand says 4.2% employment, the other hand says it's over 10%. Right? They're calling 13%. I said it's over 10%. I said that 4 months ago. So the point of the matter is that is mom and pop, right? Stop looking at it from a standpoint of a number. That's mom and pop. That's people, individual people that are unemployed, and that's a lot of people. Then you've got 35% that are in harm's way of bankruptcy, call it over 30%. That are in harm's way of bankruptcy. Then you got credit cards that are now 50% delinquent. How in the world can anybody say that we're not in a recession? It is delusional, it's stupid, and anybody that's promoting it is culpable in the crimes that are being committed against mom and pop.
Well said. And other than that, guys, let us know what you thought of this. Share your comments below. Don't forget to share this video, like it. Other than that, happy Friday. And if you guys are out there just trying to live your life, purchasing real estate, stocks, whatever it is, you guys already know we wish you luck and we hope you win.